And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. I will copy and paste the meeting notes and agenda doc in this chat here. Feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list. A little bit of housekeeping to kick things off. Is this your first time, Cale? Have you joined before? Would you like to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Cale Shipman. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. I am currently CTO at a little financial tech startup called Open Finance. And we're building everything in TypeScript, which I adore. And I'm actually a relative newcomer to TypeScript. I think I started writing in TypeScript about 3 years ago, and coming from PHP. So it's been a wonderful step up in terms of embracing type languages. And anyway, yeah, I've been running into this. I've been learning a lot about NPM in the process, and I'm coming at it with a lot of other experience from previous package managers. So looking forward to kind of participating in this, and look forward to meeting the rest of you.
Awesome. Well, thanks. We can do a quicker round of intros maybe, as it's your first time. My name's Darcy Clark. I'm the Senior Engineering Manager for the open source team and CLI specifically for NPM. Wes, did you want to go?
Sure. Hey, I'm Wes. I work at Netflix. I work on a bunch of build stuff at Netflix, but also just have been doing these meetings for a while, even before then. So yeah, I like NPM. I use it a lot.
Roy?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, my name is Roy. I also work at the CLI team.
Claudia?
Hey everyone, my name is Claudia. I also work on the CLI team with Isaac, Darcy, and Roy.
Isaac?
Hi. Like Cale, I also came to JavaScript via PHP, although not so recently. Been doing NPM the whole time. Still doing it.
Cool. And Jordan, I think you're last.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jordan. I actually, by way of Rails, also came from PHP many, many years ago. And I maintain a bunch of projects, and I'm on a couple node working groups and TC39. So.
Awesome. Cool. So just quick notes and a bit of housekeeping as well. All calls that we run here at NPM and the RFC process that we have in place at npm/RFCs, the GitHub repo npm RFCs, is covered under a code of conduct. So we just ask that everybody is kind and respectful in the comms here in the meetings. Please, as is tradition, raise your hand if you'd like to speak on a subject, and we'll try to make sure to get to you. And if you want to know more details and read the thorough code of conduct, it's a link there on the RFCs repo. The intentions of this call is hopefully to create a new channel for us, or have another channel for us to, as an NPM team and community, to collaborate and hopefully move RFCs forward and to address any concerns and work through features. Is there any announcements that any folks have on the call before we dive into the agenda? If not, the first item that I actually put on here sort of last minute was just a note that we've started to move some of the previously itemized issues to GitHub Discussions. So you'll have seen a little bit of churn, which I apologize, that's on my part, that we're going to be testing out the new GitHub feature for discussions in RFCs. For RFCs and questions, both here in the RFCs repo as well as in the NPM CLI repo. This should help a bit with trying to deviate or delineate essentially between topics for discussion versus more feature-driven work, more more focused actual issues around things that are problematic, let's say within the RFC repo itself. We're hoping to get some feedback from folks. I already saw Wes and Jordan had noted some of the drawbacks. So apologize for the spam in your inboxes. I also have taken note that discussion threads do not have labels. That is definitely something that is a drawback. So the automation I think that we'll have in place going forward, because these agendas are automated, we do pull from a label called agenda. So issues and PRs that are labeled with the agenda label actually get picked up by the automation that we have in place across all of our repos. So we're gonna have to look at a different way to pull in some of these discussion threads just to make sure they aren't lost. So feel free to ping me before these calls in case there might be something that you notice isn't on the agenda, and we can always add it to the end in case one of the discussion threads has some meaningful discourse that we want to bubble up. And is there any other thoughts, feelings on discussions or on that topic specifically?
So I brought this up because we were, Tyranny and I were working on that meeting, auto scheduler thing. And he and I were chatting about discussions as well. We could also figure out a way to, if GitHub is not planning on adding labels to those, we could also figure out a way to automate pulling discussions, if that would be helpful. And I know I said I would open a PR and never did to get that enabled on this repo, but now it's probably maybe not the time since we have no labels there. But if we find that it would be valuable, sorry, sitting outside, if we find that it would be valuable and you want that in the meeting, the PKG Meet tool, let me know and we can figure out what that will need and look like.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to potentially look at maybe it's like date. So most recently bumped and or commented on discussion might get picked up by that automation. I think potentially could be some piece of data that we could use to delineate whether or not something gets added to the agenda. That's kind of what I'm thinking for us going forward. I don't know the future. Oh, we got some extra folks on the call. Say hi to the family for us, Wes. Yeah, so I'm thinking that that's potentially an option for us with our agenda creation, but I'd love to pull in your tool that I know you and Tierney have been working on at the package maintenance working group. So so good. I'll take a note on that and see what we can change and make sure we don't lose any meaningful discussions. But moving on, so the first actual PR or RFC is actually something that I've queued up. So PR number 135. This essentially addresses some, or tries to address some of the discussion we've had about essentially unratifying or withdrawing support or intention to implement RFCs that have previously been ratified. So we realized that going through and grooming our backlog of things to be implemented, that some of the RFCs that we had previously said, got a stamp of approval and that our team would look at and try to implement no longer make sense, or that they are essentially succeeded by a net new RFC. And so hopefully this, this language that I'm trying to propose here, and I'll link it here in the chat for everybody. Hopefully this sort of outlines a good process for us to essentially withdraw support. So that's PR 135. Wondering if anybody has any thoughts, feelings about this. I know there hasn't been any discussion on it, so if it's uncontroversial, it'd be great to move forward. Seeing some thumbs up. Isaac, any thoughts? Yeah.
I haven't actually gone through and digested this. Apologize, but yeah, I also don't have really strong feelings about it as long as there is some kind of process and we're not, under the mistaken impression that we're obligated to do everything that our past selves ever thought was a good idea, which can be, kind of hazardous. It's fine. There's a handful in there in the accepted folder that I feel like it's misleading to have them there, sitting there, since it sort of is communicating that we are intending to do it, and some of them we're definitely not.
So I don't have any issue with this PR and with the general concept of like not assuming that accepted is a permanent state, but it seems like there's an RFC is two things. It's a problem statement and a solution suggestion. The solution suggestion in no way should be permanent and should always be subject to evolution and breaking changes, right? Like that's what Semver is for. But ideally, the problem statement is something that when an RFC is accepted is something that is generally considered a permanent problem to be solved, which would mean that an alternative solution is always fine, but if ideally it would address that use case. I don't want to suggest that it be like set in stone, but I would like the spirit of it to be that once a problem is agreed upon that it's worth solving, that it is forever worth solving somehow.
So that's a good point, Jordan. I'm wondering what happens if the problem goes away, or like somehow we've like, you know, it no longer.
And in that case,
relevant,
the stakeholders for the original problem, the folks who had the problem, presumably they would all agree with it, and then it would be non-controversial. And that's exactly why I don't think it should be set in stone. But like, if it shouldn't, if a solution becomes unfeasible, that shouldn't unilaterally make the problem no longer desired to be solved.
Well,
ideally.
There are going to be cases. I mean, we're speaking extremely meta now, but
totally.
There are going to be cases, right? In any given, for any given problem, there is always kind of the null solution, which is we just accept that this is a problem and we deal with it, and don't actually have the CLI address it. And there may be times where that like non-solution ends up being the one that we do settle on over time. So even though we recognize like, yeah, it's a problem, we explored it, we had an idea, we thought it was a good idea, it turns out no. The net result might be just like, you know what, we're not going to tackle this. Like,
and I think that's fine. And I think that it would be unwise to eliminate that as an option by setting it in stone. I just like wanted to somehow call out, at least out loud, that like
most of the time that's
well, yeah. And then if we're choosing the non-solution, that should be a very explicit and documented decision, like so that the folks who are thus screwed out of their solution later have an explanation of why.
Well, and another kind of solution here is that these RFCs are accepted via pull request, and they can be withdrawn via pull request. And that pull request, you know, we have documentation about who created the initial pull request. We can involve them, and it can be optionally more of a discussion. So like here, I'd like to withdraw this. Here's why, you know, and discussion ensue. And if that results in a new RFC, then great.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and
if we document it,
is to document as well, essentially adding. So that's why there's a template there for appending essentially the initial RFC. So like there is an artifact that is created as to the reason why this is no longer, you know, relevant.
Yeah, I just think for many of those, it's likely going to be something we want in the official NPM documentation, not hidden in the RFC's repo. But yeah, I mean, all of these are totally viable options, and none of them should delay this PR. I just wanted to throw it out there.
And no worry, Scale, we're not super stringent. Awesome. Did you have anything else to top up on there, Isaac? I noticed you unmuted.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, as long as when we move it from accepted to unaccepted, or however this process defines it, there should be like a bold heading put at the top that's like, this is why we're not doing this thing, and then here's what it was, and that's also really useful to have those like rejected solutions or rejected problems even, because then there's kind of a set of anti-goals. Like if you come along and you say, well, I think that we should do this, there's an easy thing to say, oh, here's why they're not going to, and let's not waste the time discussing it again.
Yeah, it's good. So I'll let everybody, since I don't think a lot of folks have had a chance to maybe review it, maybe if you can feel free to add your thumbs up on the RFC itself if you think it looks good, or feel free to add any amendments to the way I've worded things, or if we want to change the format of that, would be great. So I don't think we'll ratify it right now, but might be something that we can do async in the next week or so, once people have actually looked through that. Awesome. So moving on, unless anybody else had anything they wanted to add on this process. Nope. I think it's just good. I know we've talked about it for a bit, so I'm hoping that we can have something like this to give us a way forward, and clean up our backlog there. Awesome. So item number 4 on the agenda is the RFC for removing depth from NPM outdated. I'm not sure, Claudia, if there's any updates here, or if you'd like to speak to this again. I know the last person to actually comment on this was you, to Roy.
Yeah, I don't think there are any important or relevant changes. It seems from last week's discussion that everyone was on board. Basically, this RFC talks about removing the depth flag and adding a new one, all, that will basically just display all outdated packages in your project. So unless anybody's against, I think straightforward.
Can you talk a little bit about your comment here? I'm interested. I don't think this is any problem or anything. Just node location, the physical tree versus the logical dependency tree. Can you talk about what you mean there and why that's the case?
Yeah, it seemed like on V6 we were displaying as location basically just the root path of the project, and we were just showing the nested packages. The nested path of the packages, and in this case, on V7, we're actually going to take the physical path where the package lives on the file system. This is the only change in information that is going to be changing. Yeah.
Okay. Could I propose maybe an addition? So I've been messing around with this just recently. So, and I found that a couple of times when I ran it, I was like, I wonder why that's there. And then looking just at the physical, file system path didn't tell me. I had to do an npm ls and see, oh, that was brought in via, whatever other package. It might be valuable to show both. I know I would probably use both in the debugging I was doing the other day.
Yeah,
I know it could be multiple too, because that was one of the other things I was trying to figure out the difference. I had a package that was, I had 2 versions of it in my tree, and both were outdated. And I wanted, and outdated, and this is in 6, was only showing 1, which I think was, I don't know what the logic was on why it was only showing 1. Maybe it was the first one hit. Anyway, for some reason, it was only showing 1 of the versions, and then saying this is the the version I want here, and this is the version I want to update to. But then I found it another spot in the tree where it was actually an even older version, and I think it would have been updated via npm update, but it wasn't showing in the outdated. I don't have full details on what I found there, but it was definitely.
So in Isaac's new npm audit output, that seems like it has attempted to tackle the problem of how do you display one dependency that may come from many places. Is there a chance that some of that code and output could be shared so that it builds up user expectations and also explains the provenance of the package?
We could probably borrow some of the design language and concepts, but the actual output, no, it would be
okay.
It's a different kind of thing, right? Essentially, what we're dealing with is the design challenge of displaying a dependency graph, displaying information about a dependency graph, which is implemented in a file system tree. And so, Wes, it sounds like you ran into a bug in V6. I don't know what else.
Well, I didn't want to report it as a bug yet, but I also kind of thought it was a bug, but I was trying to prove that it was a bug first.
It's not one we're likely to fix, unfortunately. So if you want to save yourself the time, we could probably just let it ride. But let it ride off into the sunset with npm v6. But so the issue here is you might have a single folder in your node modules folder, a single package folder, which is found via multiple paths through the dependency graph because there's multiple things depending on it, and it gets deduped. And in a bunch of places in npm v 4, 5, and 6, when we moved, or actually since 3, when we moved to automatically deduping things, we still maintained a lot of the output from when it was a sort of, everything was nested forever. And so casting this graph into a tree shape is, results in some loss of information. The issue is, like, let's say we have a thing that's out of date, meaning that there's something that depends on it that can get a newer version. There are actually multiple different things depending on it from multiple different paths. And so you sort of want to say, this is one node that can be updated. But there are some cases where updating it means undeduping it, right? So we'll actually make a duplicate in order to get it up to date. So it's tricky. I think what we'll probably do is just have multiple lines and figure out some way to express, like, what is the edge coming in that requires that it be updated if you're doing --all. There's also there's kind of a vague idea that I think it's still just at the level of, like, me and Jordan kind of hashing it out or talking about a little bit in Slack, which is that it'd be nice if you could pass a folder path into npm ls and have it tell you, like, okay, what is depending on the node at node modules /minimist? Why is this here? Like, what are the edges on it, and so on. We have all that information at the ready when we run arborist.load actual. Like, we have that in the tree shape. It's just displaying it is kind of challenging in a way that's sort of ergonomic and useful and, like, verbose enough without being too verbose.
So I think there's 2 points I wanted to maybe hone in on. So one is, I think that the overlap between npm audit and npm outdated /npm update is, like, really high. I don't see a end user experience where I would want a big divergence, because it's really what I'm doing is hygiene. And this is why I was, talking also in that Slack. I feel like the problem right now is our hygiene is not being well supported. Our audit is getting better, but that's like the emergency. That's like when you go into the dentist for a cavity, but, like, we don't have, like, a really good workflow for, like, the general cleanup that you have to do. The current thing is run npm outdated, right? And just, like, see if you think you need to update something, right? And it's like, and it heavily overlaps with audit, because if you're just doing an outdated and update flow, in most cases, you won't be far behind when you hit that audit and you need that emergency fix, right? So I feel like these are actually pretty tied together. And if we could come up with a flow that made it just generally easier for people to do all of this in one big go, I think that would be valuable. And the way you're displaying it for audit is much better. So it seems like we should maybe think about, like, where the overlap is, and can we just combine that into one, like, health check, right? Or, like, dep health check kind of thing, as opposed to having all these disparate, pieces that we're expecting the average dev at the end of the day to actually run. Like, people aren't going to do that. We've learned that.
I mean, I think they're definitely different and useful views of your dependency graph. One of them is, what stuff has vulnerabilities? Like, what stuff is the security team angry about that I haven't done yet? Another view is, what's not up to date? Like, what in general can I pull in newer things of? Another one might be, what parts of my dep graph need funding? Another, right? And another one might be, and right, in all of these cases, you're going to have direct deps and you're going to have transitive deps. You're going to have, in other words, you're going to have a lock file or not, right? And all these things are going to determine actionability. You're going to have some dependencies like are there for more than one reason. Some of them are there for one reason, right? And like you're going to have some reasons, meaning like X, minimist is a dependency of these 8 things, or it's a top level dependency or whatever. And like, it does seem like a nice idea, kind of a holistic improvement, that to try and reinterpret all these commands as different views on the same information. And then the arborist or whatever that provides all that information can then be used as a trivial building block for other things to provide different views on the dependency graph. And obviously that's like a big set of changes and would probably require some architectural changes to a lot of these commands and possibly some breaking changes and so on. But like so Wes, I would say is it's not all just hygiene, right? Like much of the time I'm not going to want to see all those things at once, but some of the time I will.
Yeah, I would put LS in that category as well. As kind of a general purpose, like show me what I'm using.
Show me what's here. Yeah.
And right now LS shows the logical, what we call the logical tree, or the sort of dependency graph cast into a tree shape with a little marker whenever a node has already been printed. But it actually like obscures the physical tree. And
which sometimes I want to see.
Yeah, like if I get a stack trace with an error message, like I want to know like why am I using that thing? And it's really challenging when I see when I see 2 copies of something that are not being deduped in npm ls and they're the same exact version. I'm like, I want to know why. I want to know like why is this being nested? And is there something I need to do as a result?
So I think this is a good discussion, maybe not specific to this RFC. More broadly, like I think this would be great. Like also, Wes, Jordan, if you have ideas of how this looks, I know that's something that we've been struggling with, and Isaac's identified also, at least internally, that we'd love more ideas around how output, like what would the ideal output look like? And how can we improve that experience? So like if there's an opportunity to start a new discussion or a net new RFC for trying to merge some of those worlds and proposing, ideal designs or views of that information, we'd love to see, that kind of feedback and suggestions for sure.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to fully distract. I just wanted to talk about the adding of both the logical, having both of those displayed, the logical and the real path was sort of where I started. But the reason I want that is because I'm trying to think more holistically about the problem of developer hygiene around these dependencies. Which is why I led that way. So sorry, distracting there.
Part of another thing that might be interesting to explore is like a npm update that also fixes audit vulnerabilities. So run the advisory check and then run an npm update to which will be smart enough to avoid any vulnerable versions to the extent possible. Sort of like doing npm audit fix and npm update at the same time.
Yeah, so I see this really having like a strong corollary to linting, right? So like I'm of the opinion that we should be like very careful about what linting rules we add and only add ones we can fix, right? And like a dependency check or like an audit is like critical lint errors fail to build, right? Whereas like outdated is like a lint warning, right? But really what we should be trying to do is just avoid displaying these to the user ever, right? And just like running -- fix or whatever. And that's what I think about in the linting world, right? Is like, don't even run lint, just like run lint -- fix. And hopefully you've chosen the right lint rules. And I feel like we can get to the same spot in our dependency management for most cases.
Yeah, we could actually use npm doctor for this. Maybe repurpose that command to kind of do a audit and outdated check. And if you do npm doctor fix, it will like fix the audits and update things.
It's a good
Yeah, I'm definitely. So Doctor takes a long time to run, which is the only like today, and maybe that's something that can be fixed. That's the only reason I don't like. That it makes me hesitant. You know, maybe this is where I see some composition would be really nice, and where outdated is sort of one view, but like I think we want, you know, some hybrid view that is a mix of Doctor and you know, I don't know. Anyway.
We also, I mean, what this is also getting to is something that we have identified, which is like, how do we right now in the V7 release branch, we have a everything that does an npm, everything that does an arbors.reify goes through the same code path to display the results. So we always get the same, you know, this many packages need funding, you have these many vulnerabilities, this severity level, blah, 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 added this many things, removed this many things. And that's great for just like the really terse output, like I installed a bunch of stuff. For displaying the dependency graph, though, we don't really have much consistency at all. So we have outdated, which is kind of this like pseudo table type thing. We've got ls, which pretends that the dependency graph is actually a tree. We've got, what was the other one? And then there's audit without fix, which is displaying your vulnerabilities in a, also kind of like a tree structure to show you which vulnerabilities are dependent on which other vulnerabilities or caused by which other vulnerabilities. So yeah, it's a tricky design challenge, and we don't have a full-time designer working on NPM. So I think that that's probably the biggest way to frame the problem, though, is like, let's have a bigger conversation about how we display information about the graph.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Maybe that'd be a good deep dive topic someday.
For
yeah,
sure.
Probably.
Specifically bring, and to be mindful of time, to bring the conversation back to this specific RFC, I noted or see that there was just one note by Isaac Claudia to maybe add a note about depth and you know, its relevance as it stands today. I'm not sure if that's a blocker. I feel like we could probably move forward with this though. So if anybody, unless anybody else has any like major issues with the all flag.
Sounds good to me. Thumbs up it.
Cool. So it looks like we can ratify that. Moving on to PR 129. So the overrides RFC. I don't think there's been much updates or action on this since our last conversation, but Isaac, did you want to maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we in further discussion, I think it was actually after the RFC call, we went back and forth on this a little bit more, and where we landed was to change the spec so that a given override, it's basically the first match is the only one that will affect a particular resolution. And then if there is a dot member, like a single string, you know, string key with a period, then that will define the version for that particular node if it's an object. And the dot member cannot be an object. So it has to be a string. That allows us to sort of satisfy all of the various kind of bizarre desert island use cases a little bit more elegantly. So that's probably where it's going to land.
Awesome. Any folks have any comments on that? I think it just needs to be updated.
Yep.
Okay. Moving on then, PR 126, adding type information to package.json in the registry. I'm not sure if we've had any updates since our last conversation. I'm not sure what the action items were from the last call.
I think Orda opened a issue on the TypeScript repo talking about this as well.
Right, that's right.
and there was some interesting feedback there. I don't know if anybody...
I'll reference that.
I tried to read through it, but I got distracted and then never came back.
Looks like Jordan also jumped in about 2 weeks back on that thread specifically, which I linked in the chat.
Yeah, I guess my feedback is still kind of the same. It's that the like a simple Boolean of that there are types here isn't really sufficient. There needs to be a path to the types because they might not be in that package. Like if we're trying to build something that's forward looking. So I think it'd be nice to hear back from the TypeScript team about the possible feasibility of that.
Sure. So it might be okay to punt this since Or is not on the call as well. Moving on then, PR number 121 added a proposal for, I think we can move on from this. This is it looks like the commit-ish syntax for package version.
Cal is here today, right?
Is Cal? Oh yeah, okay, Cal's on.
Yeah.
Did you want to speak to this RFC specifically? Or I know your video's off.
Yeah, maybe he had to drop.
We can circle back in a second here then. We still have some time. So Roy, I know the last agenda item 117, the workspace work and running actual commands. You queued up this RFC. Did you want to speak to this a bit, and then we can circle back on the 121?
Sure. Yeah, no, last time we kind of discussed a little bit about the positional arguments versus just having a configuration that the user can use in order to define what workspaces he wants to run a specific command. Yeah, so I know I had the action item of just documenting that discussion from last time. So I was getting into that before joining the call. But for the sake of moving forward with the RFC, there is an open-ended question in which I think I'd really appreciate to get feedback from this call, which is just deciding on what name we use for the command, right? If we want to filter out a single workspace, do we just settle for SS, or do we really use the full npm workspace? And the third proposal I had there was something fancier, just like using a column and yeah. So yeah, I would like feedback on that. I think that's quite actionable, and it's just like a small bike shed we can get over with.
Could you put it to a vote or a poll potentially in the actual RFCs? It might be better to break out. Yeah.
Or maybe if just someone has a really good reason to not use one of those, like can just veto that, and that's not even up to the to the vote, right?
Was there? I don't remember, and I haven't really used it, but Yarn has workspace and workspaces, right? Is that I don't think it's documented in this.
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh no. Okay, yeah.
I don't remember if they're the same.
I don't think they're the same. I think that was what I was trying to. Let me just pull up their docs. You do have a link down here because I think workspace will operate on one and workspaces will operate on multiple, right? Isn't that how it works? I thought there was two commands.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Might be referencing Lerna's implementation. Is that?
No, it's definitely in Yarn v1. So yeah, workspace. Oh, workspaces shows info. No, it'll run and it runs in all of them. Whereas workspace, you have to specify one as a positional argument.
Right.
It might be more helpful rather than first diving into the bike shed about the CLI spelling to like list out what are the use cases like in prose? Like I want to do this. I want to do this. And then like from those say like, this is the information I have to provide in order to do that. And then look at that set and see if there are groupings that make sense. Maybe it's all one command, maybe it's 2 or 3, but like, you know, it's fun and easy to like bike shed right now and toss around CLI invocation, like magic spell alternatives. But like, until we know, you know, what we're enchanting, it's not really, you know.
I'm sorry, I missed. Is this the last discussion, the number 117 workspaces, or are we on types?
We are coming. We are talking about workspaces. We will be coming back to your PR now that you're back. So
oh, my bad. Sorry.
No worries. It happens.
That's a good recommendation, Jordan, in terms of, you know, what it is we have to pass to these to this command.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of seed that a little bit, I know there have been some comments that workspaces, you know, the thing that I was kind of proposing was similar to workspaces, and I just kind of got a first look at the workspaces stuff. Does anyone have kind of an overview of just like, oh, well, this is, you know, per Jordan's comment, this is it. Like, I want to be able to run this, and like, this is the thing.
Maybe I can go ahead and kind of share my screen again. Yeah, like just so that we can more concretely discuss what is in there.
I guess I had assumed that had already, it looked like that was already basically ratified. So it sounded like you had already kind of hashed that all over.
So right. To recap a little bit, the initial implementation of workspaces, just like enabling the NPM CLI to install workspaces if they're defined, that is already ratified and already implemented coming to NPM 7. So what we are discussing now is more workspace related functionality. So specifically around running commands across the multiple workspaces you have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Got it.
So yeah,
back online.
And just to be mindful of time, I'll time back this discussion for 3 minutes here, so we have time to circle back to Cale's. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so you can now see my screen, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So basically, the goal here is to be able to run commands across workspaces that you have, and I think also one thing we discussed in the initial workspaces pull requests RFC was that ideally, like a bunch of commands will just like by default, they will just run across all workspaces. So what we have today is that the workspaces are part of your like the main install tree. So it kind of makes sense to have these commands behaving that way. So like commands like fund, ls, outdated, they would like take info from all of your workspaces into account. Like if it happens that you run them in the top level.
So that might be one thing to note or to update in this RFC then.
Well, I think it is described that way here, or it should. Yeah, if not, we definitely need to update.
So is this RFC is for looking through it?
To be honest, I don't think any of this top stuff is controversial.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, this seems like pretty good.
Yeah. Because the second part is being able to filter, like, because some of the commands you might want to run just related to a specific workspace.
So I think that's the piece that we want to separate out. So the uncontroversial part is probably any command that becomes workspace aware. So that's almost, you know, that can be almost ratified. I think that's kind of like to Cale's point, like install just works, similar to ls should just work and fund should just work. TM quotation marks just work. But I think the thing that we want to pull out is the commands that are specifically going to be scoped to some sort of like sub command, like workspaces sub command, like run script or something like that, right?
I would recommend resisting the urge to descope that. I think that's one of the primary features of workspaces, and you're not shipping a very interesting thing without that. The ability to run commands in a subset of workspaces.
Oh no, yeah, that's I don't think we want to
Maybe I
disclose that. No, yeah. We want to we definitely want that to have that. Otherwise, you cannot run like tasks. You cannot run start. Yeah, we want to run all these commands.
Well, right. Like this number one though is for all workspaces, and that's certainly important. But I think it's almost more important to be able to run it in the subset. So I'm just hoping that that's included in the V1.
Yeah, it should definitely be like it is the subset for all of these commands over here, right? So for each one of these commands, you should be able to like npm workspace, use the name of one of the workspaces you have, and run that specific command, right? So here task, like, but it can be just like one of the user scripts you have.
To be where we have the time box, and I think I really strongly agree with Jordan. Adding this stuff and keeping it all together will make it easier to manage, and I'm against moving it out.
Sure.
I think we just need to bike shed, which we can do in the issue personally.
Sounds good. So please feel free to add comments to this. And yeah, if you want to have start a poll, Roy, I know that we have a Probot implementation, so you can just start that in a comment.
That'd be nice, yeah.
If you want to get people to vote on the specific subcommands.
Sure, yeah, right. I think it makes sense.
Cool. I want to circle back then on 121. So Cale, your proposal for adding new syntax to package version. Would you like to just run through sort of the PR and the intent?
Yeah. So first of all, I should preface this. As I said at the beginning, I'm somewhat of a newcomer to NPM, and so I haven't used some of the features like Yarn workspaces and stuff like that already. That it's very possible that could solve my problem. I think that as I was kind of reading on it and reading kind of looking at kind of how it works versus what I was proposing, I'm realizing that some of this to a certain degree is a paradigm issue. And it's in many ways, it's funny, it's in many ways comparable to object-oriented paradigm versus functional paradigm, where I'm looking more for, I want it to be explicit, I want it to be functional, and what workspaces are is more of a kind of stateful, internally stateful paradigm, which, is just, I think to a certain degree, you either, it's funny because it's also JavaScript is a dual paradigm language. And so it kind of makes sense that our package manager, is struggling with paradigm ideas as well. But I want to preface it with that because I realize that this is not really a better way to do it. It's just a different way to do it. And it's a way that makes more sense to me. And so I think, what we might find is that like, there's a ton of momentum around the stateful way. And I just need to learn the stateful way, and that can absolutely be the conclusion here. So basically the problem that I was addressing here, I do a lot of development of kind of interconnected repos in various scopes. So I have, project A that I'm in active development on. That's a dependency of project B, which I'm in active development on, and unrelated project C. And with solutions like Lerna and I think workspaces, it kind of requires a lot of, it requires the actual establishment of these hierarchies and some kind of initial setup and some initial like state setting. And once you've got that set up, then, it's almost like a monorepo type situation where like, yeah, you can kind of commit that set of branches or that set of commits, and via that mechanism, you can go back to exactly the state that you wanted in development. But then that means that if you've got several unrelated projects that are all depending on these kind of in development dependencies, then you don't really have an opportunity to easily switch between them. And so what I was looking for was a very explicit way to just say like this, I don't care where you put it. I don't care where it comes from. This is where you get the version that this depends on. So just npm install, it's the most basic command. And it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do. Again, this is a functional program concept. It's going to tell you exactly what you need to do to fulfill that dependency via this kind of syntax where you can say, okay, well, this isn't published yet. So just link it. You have to link it into this, and it's got to be at this version, and this version is found at the branch, that's kind of unstructured data about like where to find this version. So again, I mean, this is kind of, that's the problem that I confront surprisingly frequently. Actually, I just ran into it yesterday, and I might just be using the program wrong. That could be it. But that's kind of what I was trying to go at here, and so I'd love some pushes or shoves or whatever that you guys have to give me.
There's no raise hand, but I would like to add, this is a very common problem. And this is one of the reasons why I was, so I don't think about it, I think about it slightly differently. I think about it as like bottom up or top down. This is a bottom up. Every low level package can say, here's like all the things I need. Whereas Workspaces is like, there's the top level thing that says like, actually all these lower level things fit together, right? Mm-hmm. And I pushed pretty hard at the beginning on the Workspaces implementation to say, look, we need to support something other than mono repos. I work all the time in multi-repo setups, just like you're describing, where we have package A depends on package B. I'm working on them together, and I need some way to be able to define that in a way that's not totally dependent on my file system and some symlinks I set up or whatever. I think that we could come up with a way that Workspaces can solve this, but I think there is value in thinking about both directions and seeing if maybe there's something simple we could add, like you proposed, maybe not specifically what you proposed, but something similar to this realm, which could work in conjunction with Workspaces. I don't think we necessarily have to go all in on only one approach for that. So I'm fully in support of exploring what we could do here, recognizing that there is overlap.
Okay. Could I get just kind of an idea? Is this, so you've just affirmed that this is something that you've dealt with. Is this a pretty common thing that people have run into before? Am I, okay.
So I have, I'm realizing that I can't raise my hand because I have admin privs. So the use case here is valid, and it's actually kind of, it's essentially the same set of needs that led to there being an npm link in the first place. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of challenges with this proposed implementation specifically that just kind of make it somewhat costly if we were to do it. The first is just that it adds a new spec type, a new dependency spec type, which means that there's just quite a lot of places where we kind of need to be aware of that. Thread it through all of the like npm package argument, make sure that we maintain the same consistency so that you can, npm install foo at link pound whatever comment, right? Like, and so that's not a deal breaker, but it is something that bumps up the kind of implementation cost, which is worth considering. The other thing, which I think is probably a little bit of a bigger like conceptual obstacle, and I think that there's probably a way to thread this needle, is that it sort of nudges people towards using the global install space, which we generally try to avoid. So the reason being that I think it is an attempt to make that less bad, which I appreciate. By telling you like you need to link it and here's the thing you need to link if it's not there. But the hazard is just like, I think the moving forward, once we like the community has kind of established that like the JavaScript community as a whole has kind of established like Workspaces are a better solution to this, because you have essentially a declarative description of what the solution constraints are for your given program without relying on anything kind of outside of the project, right? So like with Lerna or with Yarn workspaces, you say, this is the thing that this is where all of my projects are, and then you can load them. Now, I see Wes, you're like,
because it's dependent on it all being in one repo, right? Like I totally agree that is a great solution in a mono repo, right? But
well, so
the solution here is the other side.
If we either support nested workspaces, or if none of your projects are using workspaces, then there's no reason why it needs to have a .git folder in the root of that workspace project, right? Like it could just be a folder that has subfolders in it.
Right, but so there's a mix and match scenario here that is very common. I'm working on Express and I've got all of my Express things, but very commonly, so just now, recently, I've been working on pulling out your the Arborist test server, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I pulled in some Express dependencies. So now I've got those cloned locally, and I'm not actively working on them, but say I was, right? I've got those cloned locally, and I've got NPM cloned, Arborist cloned locally, and I've got my little tool that like sort of pulls in all of them, right? There's no way that I want to now switch my whole workspace, which is a flat directory, to suddenly now be on this project where I'm going to go back later tonight and be working on Express again and want my Express workspace that doesn't have Arborist and doesn't have these other tooling. And I don't want to have to be moving them around in directories just to get that to work.
So is this, in that kind of use case, Wes, that you described, like, isn't that just solved more effectively by having a regular, like a regular file dependency, like just a regular symlink dep?
But see, that's not transmissible to other people. I think what I was looking at was that this link, there is kind of a generally established like central location for these. So that's basically a way of saying, whatever your file system looks like, npm link is a standard mechanism for targeting file system dependencies. And then we add to it the version constraint. To me, honestly, if there were one thing that we could add from all this, it would just be enforcing version constraints on links. And then npm would at least say like, hey, this link doesn't point to the version that I need, do something about it.
Right. So you could have the thing that's in dependencies could still be just like a plain old file : .. /foo. But then have some other declarative way to say my foo dependency needs to also be this version, or maybe
So
you have the version number in the dependencies and some other way to say this one should actually be linked to this path.
So I have a sort of odd thing that just connected in my brain. What about overrides? What if we do overrides and we just say that in order to do this, what you need to write an override that points to a Git path with a version, semver compatible version tag in it or something, right? Like I'm spitballing, but like it seems like there's some overlap here that could get us the result we want without having to do something that we weren't already planning on doing. AKA we have workspaces for the one way, and overrides could possibly implement this.
Well, see, for me, the override concept was, we ran into problems with that because that then commits to the repo a specific path for the override, which doesn't really solve the problem. I mean, that's the same thing as just committing a path on your file system in the
well, right, but a Git override, like if the override was pointing to a Git URL with a hash or a tag or something, right? Then you kind of get what you're having here, and then you would have to pull the Git repo down.
What you don't get then is, I was actually in a state like this recently. I had to unpack this really gnarly bug with minipass that involved minipass pipeline, minipass flush, make fetch happen, npm registry fetch, and like the only way I could get it to happen is if all of these things were being used in concert. And so it's kind of like bouncing around between different repos. So what you don't get by an override that points at a Git ref is I don't get the ability to just like CD into that folder, add some logging, and then run the tests in the other place and have it all just work. So like the way that I mean, my standard MO is I just edit files in the node modules folder. And I think that's actually what a lot of folks do. But that does feel a little gross, and it requires that you know a lot about the implementation details.
Well, one thing, I mean, sometimes what I've done is I'll actually just like go into the node modules and symlink the repos themselves. So that's another way of doing the same thing, except then I can kind of still manage the repos in my standard file system. But again, I mean, essentially that's a manual way of doing what I was proposing here.
Yeah.
And you can achieve that today with npm link as well.
Yeah.
Which, you know, again, has its own problems. I mean, part of the problem is the node module resolution then is detached, right? So that's what Workspaces solves by hoisting, right? So as soon as you go into this symlink, you know, other location, you've now, like, if they were sharing, and this particularly happens with like React and front end stuff, right? If they rely on sharing a React version, you can't symlink that over, because now that one needs React over there. It won't be able to find it, right, when your bundler runs or whatever. I mean, or if it's a backend server-side rendered React, right? Node will start up and then it'll hop over there, and now you'll have two versions of React, right?
Just be mindful of time here, folks. We're already about 5 over. And I do want to make sure that we get some of the discussion actually put back onto this PR. I think a few couple notes, Wes, that you made in terms of the overlap of some of the existing things we're looking at in terms of overrides might help solve for this, and workspaces might help solve for some of these use cases that Cale has. And I would love to hear any other recommendations actually in the thread.
It's been helpful to just kind of dig into the need here a little bit more, the why. So I will try to capture some of my concerns with the implementation proposed, and we can just kind of add that to the constraint list and just explore offline a little bit.
I think the color around specifically why npm link is insufficient is great to understand. So appreciate you jumping on.
And actually, just a final comment here. When you look at it, npm install. So when you npm install a package on the command line, it assumes at latest. I look at link as basically doing the same thing. And so, you know, looking at it as kind of a mirrored syntax, you could envision like npm link, you know, minimist at some version, and then that would add this version constraint to linking. So something like that.
That does work. You can pass any arbitrary spec, and it'll just install that thing globally.
Yeah, but then it doesn't enforce that on subsequent installs.
Right.
So anyway, I know we're done discussing for now. So I'll look forward to continuing this in the actual PR thread.
Yeah, I think if we zoom out a little bit, the sort of fundamental need here is how do we make link depths in development work for a team of more than one person?
Yeah.
It's a great thing to solve for. And I know Wes is very passionate about it. So you've got somebody in your corner for sure, Cale.
Great.
we all are. So thanks for jumping on and explaining that. Thanks for everybody else. Roy, I think you were taking great notes. We'll love to see those get added to the repo. And hopefully we'll keep up the discussion and further RFCs in the repo itself. And I'll see you folks in either a week or 2 weeks, depending on if we're doing a deep dive next week. So I'll post a thread about that in the actual repo. So look forward to talking to you folks soon. Cheers.
Great. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.